So without any further introduction, I give you Darhon Rees-Rohrbacher.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad to see so many people here, and I see a lot of names I recognize. So some of you I've never actually seen your faces, and now I can put a face with the name. I'm going to mostly be using the handout that says the process of creating a harp arrangement. I'm asking that while I'm going through the handout, if people would put their questions or comments in the chat, Anna can kind of field those to me. I want to make sure that I get through all the topics on the handout. And then when I'm all finished with it, I'll open it up to verbal questions at that time. I'd just rather not have the flow of information interrupted. Partly because, as Mary will tell you, I'm very OCD as a person, and I need to stay organized. So I don't want to lose track of where I'm going. Pardon me, my nose itches. What do they say when your nose itches? Something about good luck or something going to happen. Anyway, all right, so we're going to go right with the handout. I'll talk briefly about some other handouts that also came with it, but I'm going to be going right down the list with the main handout. Some of you may be using a computer notation program like I do. I use an Encore program. Some people use Finale, Sibelius. There are different programs out there. Some of you may write by hand, but even if you write by hand using manuscript paper, the process of arranging really is about the same. It's just faster when you have a computer music program. That's the main advantage. So let's talk about what you're going to do. If you're writing a harp arrangement, and if you plan to write more than one harp arrangement, it's always good to create what I call a template. And I have a couple of these. I have actually three of them. I have one for harp solos. I have one for harp and flute because I have a flute partner I work with, and we do quite a bit of harp and flute literature, and I have arranged many things that we use. And I also have one for vocal arrangements because I do write things for my church choir. So we're going to be talking mostly about solo harp arrangements today. So you want to create a template. If you're using a computer music program like Encore, Finale, Sibelius, whatever you use, I have found from experience that you want to adjust your page size so it's somewhere between 80 to 90% of full size. Generally speaking, 100% makes really big staff size and note size. And I was talking about this with Mary before this webinar began. There's kind of an optimal size of notation you want to use. If it's too big, then you can't scan the whole page and see what's coming ahead. If it's too small, then the notation becomes microscopic and it's hard to read at the harp, because remember, the harp is at arm's distance. Your sheet music, if you're playing from a music stand, is at the tip of your fingertips away from your nose. So that gets into a different visual distance, especially if you wear glasses, as I do. So I mentioned that in this first Roman numeral section. Consider that sheet music is at arm's length away from the eyes. So it's very different if you're sitting there at a table or at your computer that might only be 18 inches to 24 inches away from your face. That's a little different distance than 3 feet away. Margins, you have to consider your margin size. It needs to be narrow enough where your music can fill the page, but if you're going to have the music bound into any kind of a book, like with spiral binding or something, you have to consider that there are going to be hole punches. So you have to have enough margin all the way around in order to account for that. Having said that, don't make your margins too big, all right, because then your music can't fill the space on the page and you have a lot of wasted space. All right, how many systems should you have per page? Well, partly depends on how much notation you have, how busy your notation is, whether you're using a lot of 16th notes, etc. But generally speaking, most of the time on the first page, on an average piece of sheet music, what I'm seeing is 4 systems, occasionally 5, but a lot of times 4, because you have your headings at the top of the page: name, composer, title of the piece, all that stuff. And the second page, you don't have all of that heading information, so you can have more systems on your second page. And I often see 5 or 6. If I look at my average books that I publish, I see that I have 4 systems on the first page and then 5 on my subsequent pages. Number of measures per system. Again, it depends on your notation. If you have a lot of whole notes, they don't take as much space in a measure as opposed if you have a lot of maybe running 16th notes, a lot of big arpeggios with 16th notes. Those take up a lot of space within a measure. So if you have a lot of black notes with a lot of flags on them, so to speak, you may find that maybe you can only even get 3 measures sometimes on a system. So you have to space your measures depending on how busy your notation is, how many notes with flags you have within a measure. So you don't want everything to be all squished so it's hard to read. Remember again, the music's at arm's length roughly away from your eyes. So you have to consider the readability. And then of course we have to, put time in key signature. What I sometimes do is when I'm creating something, I just write everything in C major right off the bat. I just notate it all in C major because I use an encore notation program, and with one click, I can simply change the key and all the notes will move to the new key. So if you find it easier to notate in C major initially, go ahead and do that. You can always change it. So anyway, I don't know if we have any questions in the chat. Anna, just let me know if that should happen. I'm going to move right down to the next section. There are some other handouts I'm going to show you, and I'm going to actually show you in a few minutes my encore template so you can see what I mean. Okay, choosing a melody. Because I was trained classically as a singer, I always think in terms of melody first. I'm very melodically oriented. So you might have a melody you like. Maybe you heard it on the radio. Sometimes I'll hear something at church, like the organist has played an arrangement of something. And I'm like, wow, that would make a great harp arrangement for a wedding. And so I'll ask the organist if I can borrow the music, or sometimes I'll go actually find it and buy it myself so that I can work from it. There may be folk tunes you like, popular songs, operas. Again, classically trained, I've used quite a few opera themes and symphonic themes for some of my arrangements. Ethnic music, you may have a certain background. For example, my heritage is Welsh on my father's side, and I've written quite a few Welsh arrangements because it's a type of music I'm familiar with and it speaks to my heart. And I think they're great tunes. And of course, classical piano music, a lot of that has been notated for the harp. All right, you have to consider, this is under Roman numeral 2, I'm on B and C for lever harp. Certain things are not lever harpable. They are just far too chromatic. It is cumbersome to be flipping levers constantly, even with the best notation and working around. There are certain compromises you can make, and other times it's just too cumbersome. So be realistic. Something that's extremely chromatic doesn't work. Under Roman numeral 2C, I will mention something I have found a workaround. All right, this is a true story. And this is how I worked around it. I played for a wedding with my flute partner, and the mother of the bride said she loved Josh Groban, and could we please play some of his songs? All right, so I notated 6 of them for lever harp. All right. However, what Josh does in all of his songs, he'll be singing in a certain key, let's just say G major, and then there's a bridge halfway through, he modulates to G flat major. It is impossible to go from G major to G flat major in one measure on a lever harp. So what did I do? I just didn't do the modulation. I just kept doing it in G major because all he really does is he does the next verse or the refrain or whatever in a new key. So that is a way you can kind of work around these crazy modulations that appear in a lot of pop music. And that's what I had to do for this wedding. These arrangements aren't for sale. They're just something I wrote for the occasion. I notated them for my flute partner and I based on the song without any modulations. So that was my workaround. And that's a true story. That was just a few months ago I had to do that. All right. Having said that, let's talk about good keys for the harp. Again, because of my classical background, and I do play quite a bit of classical music on my lever harp as well as pedal harp, um, I tend to favor the keys of E flat, B flat, and F. Somebody who's a strict Celtic player, only does Celtic music, may prefer C, G, or D. Partly depends on what you're using it for, the audience that you're going to be writing this for. Um, Probably one of my favorite keys to write arrangements in is the key of F. Most of my friends who play only lever harp tune in F if they don't tune in E flat or B flat. So by tuning in or by writing something in the key of F, anyone who tunes in E flat or B flat can automatically play things in F. And I find unless somebody's a strict Celtic player and only does like the keys of C, G, or D, most people can work in F. So I like that key. That's just my personal preference. But I do have quite a few things that were written in E flat or B flat. Again, you have to consider, and this is under 3B on the handout, bulk of the writing should occur in the mid-range of the harp. So depending on how many strings your harp has and what the range is, you may need to adjust your chosen key based on that. Also, consider the range that you need to accompany a vocalist or solo instrumentalist. Let me give you an example. I mentioned my flute partner. On your average flute, the bottom note of the flute is middle C. If you have a very nice flute, you have what's called a low B foot, which means you do have the B a half step below middle C available to you. But for all intents and purposes, if you're writing for flute, you should consider that middle C is your bottom note of the range for the flute player. If somebody's not a real good flute player, doesn't have a very high level of playing, the middle C being the lowest note in the range is a difficult note for the flute to get a good tone on. So you have to consider the range of the instrument or the vocalist if you're writing to accompany a vocalist. Always ask, what's the range of the instrument? Have somebody write it out for you on a staff. If you're writing for, I don't know, French horn with harp accompaniment, you need to know the range of the French horn and also that it doesn't sound at pitch. So all of these things you have to know. If you're writing for B flat trumpet, there's a reason they call it B flat trumpet. All right, so you have to consider that, and that helps you choose the range that you need to be writing the harp part in, as well as the instrumental part. Do we have any questions in the chat? I'm not seeing anything. Okay, I just see somebody made one comment. Says our trio enjoys music in A and E also. Lots of levers up. Oh yeah. I have to tell you a funny story. I was at a Welsh heritage thing, I don't know, last month or something. Anyway, sometime this summer I was there. And they were doing a lot of folk songs, and they wanted the harp to play along with guitar, sing along, that kind of stuff. And he started to sing, and I'm trying to figure out what key it's in. Well, he was in the key of E major, and my harp was tuned in E flat. So I had all my levers up. All right. Okay, so after you choose your keys, notate the raw melody. As I mentioned, it can be done in the key of C. That's fine because you're going to transpose it later. If you can only think in C, or if it's easier for you to think in C, like white keys of the piano, then just do that initially. All right. What I always recommend, and I learned this the hard way because I didn't do this. When you notate your melody, try to make sure that you notate it accurately the first time because it will save you a lot of time later, so you don't have to go back and fix it. Try to even make your stem directions turn correctly. Again, it'll save you time later. And notice how many measures the melody requires. A typical melody, like a folk song, might be 16 measures, or a hymn. 4 bar phrases is very common for a hymn or a folk song melody. So just kind of be aware of how many measures it's going to take because that will govern, this is on Roman numeral 5, choose the number of repetitions. In a typical two-page harp arrangement without page turns, you'll find that generally 2 or 3 repetitions of the melody will fit on a two-page arrangement, depending on how many white or black notes are in that melody, and how many measures the melody requires for one repetition. You can do a lot of things to make the repetitions more interesting. I mentioned in Roman numeral 5, C, where it says subsequent repetitions of the melody can be written up or down the octave or in the relative minor, which makes a really interesting twist and adds a lot of variety on the main melody. And at this point, you can sort of write out the raw repetitions. That is, when you figured out how many repetitions of the melody you want, you can go ahead and sort of put them in at this point. All right, I'm moving down my sheet a little bit. I'm on Roman numeral 6 at this point. All right, this is when I will consider, do I want an introduction? Do I want any repeats? Do I want a da capo or a dal segno? Or do I want a tag or a coda? One of the things that you can do to extend the length of an arrangement is by using these techniques, which will reduce the number of page turns you need to put in. I'm kind of OCD about page turns. Page turns are difficult for any harpist because you have to reach over with your left hand, all right, generally, and turn the page. It's a coordination feat to continue playing with your right hand alone and then reaching over to your music stand to turn the page. So anything you can do to eliminate page turns within one piece of music is a very helpful strategy. So what you can do is you can extend the length of a piece by working in like a da capo, for example. You can put a da capo indication at the end and then maybe put an instruction that when you go back to the beginning, play it up an octave. All right, that adds interest and it also helps extend the length. Or you can do a dal segno, go back to a certain point and then maybe put a little coda at the end. So it's dies al coda. And then that also extends the length without having to write an additional repetition of the melody and having another page turn in place. So these are some little tricks that I've been learning recently on how to extend the length of a piece and try to see if I can eliminate page turns. All right, and then under, this is Roman numeral 6C, it says, block out the empty measures for the above items. So I will actually go into my notation program of Encore and I'll actually add empty measures to figure out if I need to put any of these things in. Like if I need a coda at the end and I want to have a 4-bar coda, I will add 4 measures after my last repetition of the melody so that I have the measures built in to my basic template. Okay, going on to 7. Adjust the page layout. All right, you may need to adjust the systems per page, adjust the measures per system. You want to get your measures spaced out and use what they refer to as engraver's spacing, which means that the measures are proportional. A measure with a lot of 16th note arpeggios is going to be a wider measure than a measure with 2 half notes in it, because visually you need to be able to read it on the page. If you make your measures all mathematically perfect, then you're going to find that your measures with a lot of black flag notes are going to be very squished and difficult to read. So if you have an option on your engravers or your notation program to use engraver's spacing, that is always preferable, as it will give a nicer page layout for you. And you can do this at this point. Once you have figured out how many total measures you are going to have, you can start playing with your measure spacing. All right, now Roman numeral 8. Create a lead sheet. So now that I have my raw measure note, raw arrangement notated, just the melody at this point, right? I figured out how many measures if I'm going to have repeats, if I'm going to have a coda, whatever. I have figured out how many total measures I have, and I have my melodic repetitions at least very notated in the raw, so to speak. So I will go back at this point and I'll actually take the piece to the harp and I'll figure out what chords will fit it. Even if I'm not going to include guitar chords, I want to know what harmonies are going to best accompany my melody. So I will just go through, I'll play the melody in the right hand, and with the left hand on the harp, I will just play like triads. Does this triad sound good with these notes? And I'll just write the name of the chord, A, D, whatever it is, D minor. I'll write the name of the chord in. So I'm basically creating a brief lead sheet, a very simple lead sheet. I don't get fancy, just the basic chords. Excuse me, itchy nose again. So I'll write in the chord symbols, as I mentioned, even if I'm not going to have guitar chords, like if it's a very classical piece that isn't suitable for chording, I still want to know what harmonies I'm going to need. And then sometimes I'll even at this point write in a few bass notes. If I hear that a certain harmony is taking a certain voice leading in a certain direction, I'll just write in a few bass notes if that's what I'm hearing when I'm doing these chords, so I don't forget that that's what I'd like to hear. All right, Roman numeral 9, consider the page turns. All right, anytime you turn the page, the left hand has to drop out in order to reach and turn the page. So you have to plan for this if you need to have page turns. So ways you can do it. Basically, the left hand can't be doing anything significant. And one way to get around it is to have a long note, like a whole note or dotted half, on the downbeat, and then the left hand doesn't do anything else for that measure, so that the left hand can reach up and turn the page. So you have to plan for it. And if necessary, this is Roman numeral 9b, adjust the measures per system if necessary. I do this all the time. There is no law saying that every system has to have 4 or 5 measures. If it works better on a particular phrase to have only 3 measures with an easier page turn, then by all means, write it that way. Make the page turns so they are easy and they make sense. The other thing you want to try to avoid is right on the page turn, if possible. Try to avoid putting a lever or pedal change right on the page turn. And excuse me, again, doesn't it mean something significant when your nose is itching? I think it's, excuse me, I think it's ragweed allergies today.
I think it's going to come into money. Isn't that the belief?
What's it again?
That you're going to come into money.
Oh, come into money. That's what it is.
That's what it is.
I'm going to come into money. That's exciting. All right. So my nose can itch as much as it wants. All right. I'm going to come into money. All right. But you're right. I think that's the old saying about it. So the page turns. Yep. So try not to do a lever change or pedal change right on the page turn. You are too busy worrying about the page turn, and I guarantee you'll probably miss the lever or pedal change if you put it right on the page turn. So try to do it, a measure or two before, if at all possible. All right, plan the lever changes. Remember, left hand has to drop out to change the lever. It is possible to reach over the top of the harp with the right hand to change a lever. It's awkward, and I recommend try to avoid that if at all possible. Sometimes it can't be avoided, but I would rather have the left hand drop out or have a long note on the downbeat that still rings through so that you can reach up with the left hand. It's just a lot easier to do it that way. Okay, yeah, I mentioned avoiding lever changes on the page turn. And also, one of the things you have to consider with lever changes, and it's just recently, in the last few years, it kind of dawned on me. When I saw some of my lever changes, I thought, well, this is stupid. Why did you put it there? If you're playing in a certain range of the harp, your visual field is right there. So let's say I'm playing somewhere around middle C. and maybe I have 4 lever changes coming up in the next vicinity, plan the lever changes in the range where you are playing, because that's where your eyes are. Try to avoid, if you're playing right here, a lever change that's like way up here, because that's not where your visual field is. You're going to have to turn your head to see that lever. Try to plan the lever change in the range where you're playing. And so when you write your arrangement, you may need to make some adjustments in terms of where your hands are playing, so those lever changes are easiest for you to do. Don't try to put a lever change when you're not playing anywhere near that range, unless you have a big empty space like a whole note chord or something at the end of a phrase, where you have plenty of time and visual opportunity to reach up and change that lever. But I have learned this the hard way when I couldn't figure out why a lever change was so awkward. Unfortunately, I've seen this in many other arrangers' work, where the lever changes where they occur didn't make sense. So just rewrite the lever changes so they make sense. Even if they're in my pieces and they didn't make sense to you, just rewrite them, all right? Put them where they work for you, for your visual field, for your hands. All right, so we talked about lever changes. Write the arrangement. Yeah, I'm really pushing to get through this because I want to pull up an encore file so we can talk about it. And I want to talk a little bit also about the proofreader's checklist. All right, so write the arrangement. So we have our lead sheet, as I call it, notated with just the raw melody and some chords, maybe a few other thoughts, da capo, dal segno, repeats, whatever. All right, decide what style you want for the piece. Before you go any further, generally if you notate a melody, you kind of begin to hear things. Maybe you want it to be a gospel style. Maybe you want it jazz. Maybe you want it for like a cocktail hour, new wave, whatever style you want to write it in. Blues, all right. Decide what style you want and begin to kind of feel that. So let's say we're doing gospel. I'm just picking this out of the air here, gospel. So what I recommend is fill in the bass notes. A lot of times what I will hear initially is just a rhythmic pattern. So what I typically do is I will just write in the rhythm. I won't even try to notate pitches. I just write the rhythm of what I want to have in the bass, in the lowermost notes. So if I want it to be a gospel thing, I'll think about how a gospel hymn might be. A lot of gospel hymns use swung eighth notes in them. They swing the rhythm. So I will begin to rhythmically notate what I want in that left hand. So I always start with the bottom, partly because harmonically, harmonies are built from the bottom up, not from the top down. So the bass note really determines the harmony that you're going to use, no matter what the style of music is. And then the inner voices come. And having created the lead sheet ahead of time, so you know what your chord structures are, this gives you a handle on which notes, which pitches will work with the inner voices. Again, I often start with just a rhythmic pattern. In Roman numeral 11D, I mentioned something here. Consider using interesting rhythms, percussive effects, or color chords to dress up the piece. E, consider writing something in an alternative time signature, alternate in part of the piece. Like maybe you're in 4/4, change it to 3/4 in the middle and do like a waltz rhythm, and then go back to 4/4 again. So one of the things that you can do to make your arrangements more interesting is think outside of the box a little bit. Roman numeral 11F. Don't resort to the cliches of writing left-hand arpeggios for everything. The harp can do a whole lot more than just left-hand arpeggios. And that really does become kind of a cliche. And it doesn't work for every piece. It's great for Silent Night. Left-hand arpeggio is perfectly appropriate for that. But if you're writing something in a very different style, then left-hand arpeggios would not be capturing that style of music. Okay, moving on to the next Roman numeral. We're at 533, so we're good. I'm going to get through this whole sheet in the next 10 minutes, and then I'm going to start talking about some more details. Okay, perform preliminary editing. All right, even though you have a very raw shell, you want to go through and start fixing up some things before you get too far into it. This will save you time in the end when you have to do final editing. So fix your notes, fix your stems, fix, wrong chords, whatever. All right. I, at this point, will actually start writing in dynamics, expressive markings, fingerings, instructions, lever, pedal changes, because in order for me to go any further with my arrangement, I have to consider these things. I have to have already planned out where my page turns are going to be, where I'm going to do my lever or pedal changes if needed. If there's a fingering for a really odd passage that I already determined, oh, this is weird, this is going to be difficult to play, I'll actually write in a few fingerings. I don't have everything fingered at this point, but a few key things. Or if I want to repeat maybe to be pianissimo the second time, I'll make a notation on my piece at that point. I'll write PP, second time PP, so that I begin to, in my head, in my mind, I begin to hear the arrangement starting to take shape. Again, this is just preliminary. This is not final editing. All right, proofread the piece. I use a very systematic system, and we're going to look at my grid. That was a handout that was also provided to you, but I can probably pull it up also on my screen. All right, you can visually proof a piece by, excuse me, by hand or on the computer screen. You want to make any changes. What I do is when I have this very raw arrangement, I actually print it off by hand, and I have a red pen, and I sit down with a red pen. I use red because I can really see it, and by printing it off and holding it close, I'm seeing a paper copy, what it looks like printed, not just on my computer screen. Sometimes what you see on the computer is very deceptive. It doesn't look the same when you print it off on paper. And your customer's going to be playing from a printed copy, either a PDF that they've downloaded or a sheet music physical book that they have purchased. So you want to make sure that what you see in the printed music is what you want the customer to actually see. So I use this very systematic way of proofing. I proof it by hand. I go back in and make changes. All right, then I also will make another copy of my draft after I've fixed up the major boo-boos, and I actually hole punch it and put it in a 3-ring binder. Again, it's because I'm so OCD and I'm very systematic, but that way the paper doesn't get lost. And I can put it in the binder the same way any page turns might occur, so that I see what the customer is going to see. And that way I can tell if my planned page turns are actually going to work or not. Sometimes what I think looked great on the computer screen is really horrible in terms of trying to negotiate the page turn. And then the last step is when we talk about sending it out to somebody else. One of the things about proofreading, whether it's sheet music or you're an author writing a book, you can look at something 1,000 times and not see obvious errors. One of the things I have discovered about writing for harp, because I'm also a harpist, is I will autocorrect errors when I'm playing. Like if you know something's supposed to be like an A minor triad, let's say it's like a left hand A minor arpeggio, right hand some kind of melody that's meandering around A minor, I will autocorrect. If my ear hears a note that's not right, I fix it, I autocorrect it. But that's not what was written on the page. And so that is a real danger where you might go on autocorrect and not see the obvious. So if you do send it to somebody else who's proofreading, this is on the last section of my handout. Make the corrections, all right, print out a new copy. I put it in my binder, And then I put it away for at least 3 days. And I guarantee when I go back in, I'm going to find more errors. This is true of the pieces that I write without having someone looked at them, or after they come back from my proofreaders. I still find more errors. I do the same thing again. I make the new corrections. I put it away for 3 more days. I mean, I literally put it in a drawer in the binder, so I'm not tempted to look at it again. I'll pull it out and I'll find more errors. So it's a multi-step process of proofing things. And I should mention the very last thing, which says, note, in spite of the most detailed multi-person proofreading, a few gremlins always manage to find their way into the finished product. It often takes 3 printings to eliminate all of them. Because I'm so OCD, it's really upsetting to me when I find errors in my music that's already out there in circulation, despite multi-person, multi-step proofreading. And this is also true of authors and their books. I've talked to other people whose publications are by major publishing houses, and they have all told me, oh yeah, things still fly by and still get into the finished product, no matter how many trained musicians are still proofing that. So I've just had to accept that. So I'm going to go to some other handouts. And the first one I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up an Encore file and share my screen. But at this point, I want to look at the chat comments. Anna, would you like to read any chat comments?
Actually, the only one is one I put in, and I said before you said it, I leave it for a week or two before I look at doing a proofread, because I know I'm not actually reading it. There's so much of me that's playing it. Yeah, so I can completely understand that. I had a friend who was in publishing and wrote his music book and had it read by a number of other people. And the error that got out in the end that has forever bugged him was in his surname, which was Stewart. But in the book, he had spelt it wrong and it was Stew Rat. So he was not happy with that. Just
that is funny.
Yeah.
No,
okay.
and
oh, sorry. You go.
No, I just see a comment. Mary said, I think it's interesting how people think better and see. It's like a language. As I said, you know, whatever works for you. There are certain keys I tend to think in. For example, my test arrangement that I'm going to show you in just a minute, it's for Amazing Grace. I notated it in F because that's the key it's in a lot of hymnals. So when I think of Amazing Grace, I instinctively think of it in the key of F because that's in the mid-range for singers. It goes between like middle C and the next octave C, very narrow 1 octave range. And so that's why many hymnals now put Amazing Grace in the key of F. So because I'm so vocally oriented because of my past, and I do a lot of church music work and a lot of hymn work, I often tend to think in terms of the keys for hymn singing. All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to share my screen. And what I want to do is share a particular handout. You don't have this. This is an Encore music file. Can people see this Encore piece on their screen? You should see some music systems, and at the top it says Test Amazing Grace. Yes, I hope most people can see that. Yeah, if you can't, maybe you can put something in the chat. I can't really see the chat because I'm seeing my screen. So I did exactly what I said that I would do if I were writing an arrangement. So what I did was I put in some temporary headings, and I have a template that has my headings where I have my name. I'm a member of ASCAP. And then the tune for Amazing Grace is actually called New Britain. And it's found in an old shape note publication called the Southern Harmony from 1835. So this is where the tune came from. And so I put that at the top, but I have a template where I actually would write something like source on my template, and then I would fill it in. So that you could see what I did, at the top of the piece, I wrote here margins, 1/2 inch. All right. This is subject to change. Staff size, 90%. I can play with my margin width and my staff size until I get something that has a really good page layout. I can go into my Encore program. Sometimes the 1/2 inch is too narrow if you are going to have something bound, like with comb binding. So what I can do in Encore, and most programs you can do this, I can go to my file, I can go to page setup, and I see that my staff size is at half an inch. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to make my staff size 3/4 of an inch, which is a 0.75. And I'm going to change it, and everything moved. Everything changed size proportionally. And in fact, you might see that my titles actually moved outside of the margin. So I just dragged them back in. About 3/4 of an inch is a good size. It allows enough for hole punching or comb binding. But if I didn't like it, I could change it again. You will notice I only have 4 systems on this page. Generally speaking, unless you have lots of 16th note arpeggios, most arrangements I have seen of Amazing Grace aren't real busy. So I might even be able to have 5 systems on this page. So 4 systems fit very nicely, unless I'm going to have a lot of moving notes or something. It looks like this particular melody, if I were to count the measures, all right, I'd see it's kind of a standard, 16 bar hymn, right? Has 4 4-bar phrases. What I did on the last system, because the first measure actually has a pickup note, I temporarily just stuck in 5 measures here so I could get the whole melody in. I needed to see how many measures my melody was going to take up on a page. So I would say I probably can fit 3 repetitions of this melody on 2 pages without any difficulty. I certainly could add another system on the bottom. So I see that I have 1 complete melody here. So what I'm going to do my measure command. I'm going to add 16 measures after, all right, the last measure, okay, which put a second page onto my arrangement. And I'm going to change my systems per page. Let's see how it looks if I do 5 systems per page, and then I can do a center systems. That would be the most amount of systems that I would ever want to have on a page for any first page arrangement would be 5. If it's not enough room, if I feel that things are still too cramped, then I have a couple options. I can reduce the staff size a little bit. Right now I'm at 90%. I might go to 85%. Or I might say this is just too many systems on 1 page. The other thing I could consider is, because of the nature of this melody, I might be able to have more than 4 measures per system. So you have to kind of play with your page layout if you're using a notation program. I see I have page 2 here, which of course I don't need all of this empty space at the top. So let's add some more measures. All right, so let's add 15 measures after this one. All right, and we have 5 systems per page. I have an extra measure there. I'm going to delete a measure. I'm going to delete 1 measure so that, whew, we just lost everything. I must have hit the wrong button. Now, if this happens, what you want to do is you want to close out the file. And I have done this wrong. All right, and I've lost a lot of work. Close the file and it will say, do you want to save your changes? No. All right, and then I'm going to open it back up. Okay, and then we're back to where we started because I didn't save any of those changes. So you need to get in the habits. Normally I would be like saving, constantly hitting save, save after every little change, but I'm talking while I'm doing this, so that's why I didn't do it. All right, so if that should happen, you make a horrible error, close out the file, don't save it. It'll give you a warning. Every music program does this. Do you want to save your changes? No, you don't. If it's a horrible error, you don't want to save them. It's going to cause you more aggravation in the end. So basically, that's what I do in terms of planning out my measures, planning out my systems, my staff size, etc. I'm just going to hit my save. All right, so I determined that I wanted to add, I guess it was something like, 32 measures. Okay, and then I want to save that so I don't lose my work. And then I can change to my systems per page. We can do 5. Yep. And I have a command for center systems, which vertically centers the systems on the page. You'll find that when you go to the second page of any arrangement in any program, you're going to have to drag it up to the top. That will enable you to put more systems on that page. Also, there's no reason to have all that empty staff, empty white space, I should say. All right, I'm going to save this much so I don't lose it again. So you can see how I'm gradually figuring out how many measures I need. What happened is I went to delete the extra measures. I ended up deleting the page. That's why everything disappeared. All right, so what I would do is I would adjust the measure spacing. Now, what you can do in most programs is you can copy and paste. So I have figured out this is my main melody. I would probably have another pickup note here for the second repetition of the melody. So I'm going to change this to a note. All right. And then what I can do is I can just with a mouse highlight and I can copy and start just copying my melody. I have already determined I'm going to have 3 repetitions of this melody. So what you want to do is you want to put your 3 repetitions in pretty early on when you're creating your first lead sheet so that you know how many systems you can fit, how many measures you can fit. If I'm going to have an intro, for example, on this particular piece, I think Amazing Grace is really nice if it has an introduction. So what I might want to do is I might want to tell it to add 2 measures before the beginning. And I'm going to say that so I don't lose it. You'll see what's happened is all of my heading stuff got all cockeyed. And you'll have to adjust it then. All right, so however you want to drag these around. All programs have preset composer information you can put in, but what I found is it's often too far down on the page. It's like here, and then I have a lot of wasted white space. So I, by hand, use a text box, and then I can drag these vertically wherever they would fit. Those are there only for my benefit. All right, I know the tempo is going to be about andante. I'll just leave that there. And again, I'm going to save this so I don't lose it. So as I'm working, I keep saving things. So this is the process that I go through when I'm writing an arrangement. I do this very systematically so that I can start creating things in a way that's not haphazard. So it's very organized. And I find that an arrangement will begin to fall together fairly quickly if I use this system. When I've deviated from the system, then it doesn't work so well. Anna, do we have any new questions in the chat? Anything? Anna? No? Okay. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen at this point. All right. What I want to do is to talk about the other handout, and I'm going to pull up a copy. and that is the one with the proofreader's checklist. What I can do is I can share my screen also with this. Let me increase the staff size of this. All right. Hopefully some people have printed it off. All right, so let's go to share screen again because I want to talk about this last item on the handout, which is the process of proofreading your own music and also having someone else proofread it. So I'm going to share my screen again. All right, can everyone see something called Proofreader's Checklist? Okay. This is the system I use. Once I get the whole thing written, I actually use this list and I have a little grid. I'll pull that up in just a minute to show you how I use it. This is the same proofreader's checklist I send to the people who proofread my pieces. If I use this list, I find most of the bugs, but I still do the process of putting it away for a few days. I used 3 as an example. That would be the minimum number of days I'd want to put it away and not look at it. You may need to put it away longer. At any rate, so I have the whole thing written. You know, I have my cover, I have a table of content. You know, I have the whole thing done now at this point. So what you want to do first is look at the general appearance. Like Anna was mentioning about somebody whose name was misspelled. All right, this is where you want to pick up these things before you even look at the notes of the music. Do you see any typos or incorrect information on like your front cover? All right, your introductory page, your table of contents. All right, is there any text that should be added or deleted? You want to try to pick up these things. All right, this one is a real big one, number 3. Do the page numbers on the table of contents actually correspond to the pages in your book? If you have changed where your page turns occur, this may be different now. So you do want to check. Again, don't look at any notes of music yet. All right, look at these. This is like the global picture, I would call it. So look at the global picture, the global layout first. All right, is the title page visually appealing? Is it centered? Maybe it's cockeyed. Again, you would print this out. You would print out a draft of your whole book. All right, I hole punch it and put it in a 3-ring binder. You could staple it, but I find by putting it in a binder, then my page turns fall. And I do print it off 2-sided so that my page turns fall exactly as the customer would see them. So sometimes it looks great on the computer screen and you print it off. It's like, oh, good grief, this is terrible. This is not centered. It's awkward. It's cockeyed. I use an ISNB number. I put it on the back title. This is the International Standard Book Numbering that all publications that are sold in bookstores and things all have. It's like a barcode, basically. And I create a barcode for each one of my publications. They used to be 10 digits. They more recently have become 13 digits. And there are places you can go online for free that will convert any 10-digit ISBN to a 13-digit because the numbers aren't exactly the same. Most of the numbers are the same, but there are some different digits. All right. Then I do a global look at the pieces in the book. If it's one piece, I would still be going through the same process. Again, is my staff size small enough so there's enough white space to make it legible, you know, but not too big. All right, does each page of music nicely fill out the entire page? One of my bugaboos is if you have somebody who has the systems all like squished together, and then at the bottom you have 3 inches of bare space. There's no reason for that. You can visually spread out your systems vertically on the page so they fill out the page nicely. The more white space you have around a staff, the easier it is to read the notes on that staff. All right. Number 8, is the font uniform in type? All right. You shouldn't be mixing fonts within the same category. That is, if your instructions like Andante, Allegro, DC, whatever, DS, if you're using Times New Roman for that, then stick with that font for that particular function of text. You can have a different text for like your title, for example, but it's very confusing and it makes the page look messy if you don't use the same basic font. You can have different sizes depending on what it is, but don't mix like Times New Roman, Calibri, Arial, all within the same type of text function. 11, are the page margins uniform on the second and subsequent pages? Remember, the first page, you have to account for your title and all that stuff. So the heading area will be wider on the first page. But on your other pages, there's no reason why you can't drag up the systems to the top, spread them out vertically, and then just leave enough room for a page number if you want it at the top of the page. And if you do that on the second page, then subsequent pages should be the same as the second page. They should be similar in their vertical layout. Page numbers, obviously make sure they're placed in uniformly and correctly, however you want to do page numbers. Are the measures justified? We talked about engravers spacing and aligned vertically. All right, this is part of engravers spacing, number 14. Are the measures with lots of notes wider? All right, if they aren't, the staff will not look proportional and those measures will look squished. If you have measure numbers, are they correct? Are they easily visible? If you have a pickup measure where you only have like one beat, for example, Amazing Grace, if you didn't want to start with an intro, you just want to start right on the pickup, that is not measure 1 because that's considered a pickup measure. Measure 1 is your full first measure. So you have to consider that when you're doing your measure numbers. Page turns we talked about, are they manageable? All right, fingerings. Let's talk about placement of fingerings. The usual convention for fingerings is, and this is true in piano music also, that the treble fingerings go above the staff and the bass fingerings go below the staff, below the notes. However, if they're not legible in that situation or in that placement, there's nothing wrong with placing a fingering in a different spot so that it will clearly be seen. And I do that all the time. But the general convention for fingerings in both piano and harp is to put in a treble staff the fingerings for the treble notes just above the top line of the staff, and then the bass staff just below the bottom line. That's the usual convention. It's not a crime. The fingering police are not going to arrest you if you use a different system. That's just where people are accustomed to seeing them. All right, missing slurs or ties. Maybe you should have had some ties especially. All right, are the slurs ties attractively curved? If you're using a notation program, you actually can, with a mouse, sort of drag the shape of a slur to adjust it. Dynamics, Italian tempos, metronome markings. Do you have them in there if you want them? I like a fair amount of editing in the harp music I purchase. It saves me a lot of time, especially if it's written by a harpist or harper. If they have dynamics in there, at least suggested dynamics. What tempo? I love metronome markings because it gives me an idea, particularly if it's not something well known like Amazing Grace, about what the tempo, the intended tempo is. I like some fingerings, especially on tricky passages. 21, stray characters. Oh my, it's amazing the things I have found in my music. I see Mary nodding her head. Talk about gremlins. I didn't see them on my screen, but oh boy, when I printed them off, it's like they jump right off the page. It might be an accidental symbol or a fingering flying in outer space. And you see it when you print it out, which is why I always say, don't just proof your music on the screen. Actually print out a paper copy so that you can see what the customer is going to see when they actually have your sheet music in front of them. All right, notation aspects. Okay, so this is all the global stuff. All right, now let's go back and talk about the music. This is where we get down to the nitty gritty. You'd be surprised how sometimes you don't have the right time or key signature. It's amazing. The arrangement may look pretty on the page and you really didn't do this correctly. Does each measure have the correct number of beats? Oh, we've all done this, those of us who write music and publish it. You're missing a rest, you have a wrong note value, and you have to check it for all voices. Your melody might be fine. There's something I've had published that somebody, it was like published a year ago, someone, a harp player, wrote to me and said, by the way, on such and such measure on an inner voice, it should be a half note and you only have a quarter note. They're absolutely correct. I didn't even see it because it was on an inner voice and I got so seduced by seeing my own melody that I didn't very carefully look at every note on every inner voice. Yeah, missing rest, this is 24, happens all the time, you forget a rest, especially tricky and dangerous on a pickup note or a final measure. Stem direction. Sometimes you have to change the direction of the stem. You have to go against the usual rules for stem direction. If a stem is crashing into a note in the other hand, by all means, just turn the stem the other way so the notation is clean on the printed page. Beaming, 26. Most notation programs will do like auto beam, but sometimes for matters of like stress or rhythm, it actually makes more sense to beam them in a different manner. For example, you might have, I don't know, maybe you have 6 eighth notes in a row and your notation program decides to beam them all together. But I don't want that because maybe I want a rhythmic effect of each group slurred. So I would rebeam it as 2 and 2 and 2 because maybe I want da 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 in terms of the rhythmic pulse. And if it's written as 6 eighths beamed together, the player is not going to articulate it in that manner. Should any notes be moved into the opposite hand? Absolutely. And I'm doing more of this as I get more experience with my own arranging. There's no reason that the other hand can't pick up a melody note. Just because something's in the melody, for example, at Amazing Grace, maybe depending on how I have it written, it would make more sense for the left hand thumb to be playing that middle C rather than the right hand. There's no reason the right hand has to play that note. So consider whether it might make more sense to put some notes or an occasional note into the opposite hand. It's still going to be the same pitch, but it might be easier to play. If you have guitar chords, make sure they're correct and they're aligned over where they should be. Are there any missing guitar chords or do you have extra ones? You don't have to keep repeating the same guitar chord if you have 4 measures in a row where every measure is still a G guitar chord. You don't have to put the G again at the beginning of every measure. If there's a pickup bar, does the last bar reflect fewer beats? So like Amazing Grace, I had an intro, but if I were just starting with the pickup note, it's in 3 beats and I only have a quarter note being used. So I have 2 beats that are not being used, all right? So I have to account for that in the final measure. I can't have a final measure with 3 beats in it in the whole piece because I've already consumed one of the beats, so to speak, with the pickup note. So you do have to check if you have a pickup bar, either in the whole piece or maybe a section. Make sure that your last measure accounts for the pickup note. All right, lever pedal changes notated correctly. Are they at a reasonable place? Avoid right on the page turn if possible, and try to put the lever changes where they are nearest where the hands are playing, if at all possible. All right, arpeggio signs or brackets, are they aligned vertically with the notes if you use them? Last measure should end with a heavy double bar. Very last measure of the piece, when you're all done, last measure. I have occasionally missed that. I only had a light double bar, but if you're all done, heavy double bar. Section divisions. Light double bars are helpful in designating where a different section starts. I like them. I like to see them visually because it's like, oh yeah, so Amazing Grace melody is coming back again now. So they're helpful, not mandatory, helpful. Missing repeat signs. Where do they repeat back to the same place? If you have a section where you have to go back and repeat it, make sure you have repeat signs both at the beginning and the end so that you know that that's the little section that's going to be repeated. Do they go back to the correct place? This is number 36. Da capos, whatever it is, okay. Do they go back to the correct place in the music? I can't tell you how many times, fortunately I caught it on my final draft, I realized, ooh, it didn't go back to the right place. Do you need to add DC, Fine, DS, Coda? All right. Don't forget to write those in. Traditionally, they go just above the treble staff if you have those in your arrangement. And as, obviously, if there's anything else that should be changed, is there something that you didn't see, all right, that you need to fix right now? All right, I'm going to stop sharing this one because I want to pull up my grid, which goes along with the checklist. And what I do is I have the two documents side by side on the table next to me, and the numbers in my grid correspond to my document. So I'm going to share the screen and then I'm going to open it up for questions so I stop talking. I'm real OCD and I wanted to get through all this stuff. All right, so let's share it again. All right, I have a proofreader's checklist grid. Can people see that on their screen? Yes, I'm seeing some head nods. Good. My list that I gave you should have had 38 numbers on it. And each one of these items in the green column corresponds to the item in my checklist. So I go right down the list with the questions on my proofreader's checklist. And this is set up so that I can proof a book with 10 pieces in it. If I had a book with 20 pieces, I simply would have another piece of paper for pieces 11 through 20. That's how I would use it. Most of my books don't have more than 10 pieces. I have a few with like 20-ish, but most don't have more than 10. And by the way, these documents were linked on the invitation, I understand, that Mary sent. So please feel free to use them, adapt them, change them to suit you, but I'm hoping you'll find them helpful. So remember first, we talked about the global things. And I think it was like the first five items were global. So I go through every piece and I look at the global stuff. Notice I have a thing here for covers and intro. So the first thing I check is all the global stuff for the covers and intro. Where stuff doesn't apply, obviously the covers don't have notation on them, I would just simply cross out the bottom of the list, or I might write NA if it doesn't apply and just draw an arrow. So we're not talking about notation with the covers and intro. So it's only the first several items that apply. But then I systematically go through each piece and I do the list. It doesn't really matter. You don't have to do it in order with this checklist. You actually can skip around because it's numbered and the numbers correspond to the questions. So if you don't want to do them in order, that's fine. You can just skip around. Sometimes I do it assembly line. Sometimes my brain works better that way. So maybe I'm going to first check for key signature and time signature, whatever that number was. And I would go through every piece in order. So let's just say it's, I don't know, number 15. I'm just making this up. Let's say it's 15. All right, I will go through every piece. 1, 2, 3, up to my 10th piece. Is my time signature correct? Is my key signature notation correct? If it is, I put a check. It's as simple as that. I am catching an amazing amount of errors if I very carefully use my proofreader's checklist and the grid that goes with it. It is amazing how much you don't notice in your own music. So this requires me to step away from it and be very analytical, very cerebral about how I'm approaching it. obviously not everything is going to apply to everyone's music. So for example, if you don't have any repeats or da capos or any of that, just put a big line through whatever that number is. Just, scratch out that whole number because you don't need it. But the things that apply from the checklist, you can use this grid to proofread your own things. If you're only writing one piece, then where it says piece one, that's the only column you need. All right, so that's my system for writing arrangements. I'm going to stop the sharing now and get rid of that. Okay, so, woo, that was a lot. And I'm done. And now I will open it up.
I would like to, if everyone can hear me, I would like to address margins. Back in the old days, we used to have a larger margin that would accommodate where your spiral or your comb binding would be, which would mean that each page is going to have a wider margin in a different place, because you've got your left page and your right page. So your left page had a larger margin on the right side, and your right page had a larger margin on the left side. I don't think that music notation programs do that anymore. I don't think that that's inherent in the music program, but that caused a real problem with people who would forget that one side was larger than the other. And it's causing a problem now when I take old music that is not, when I transform printed music into PDF. And when you look at it, it goes like this, when you go down the whole thing like that. So that is something to watch out for now. I find that you don't have to have a larger margin anymore to accommodate the binding. Maybe back in the old days when it was comb binding, but now with spiral binding, that is much closer to the edge of the page. So you don't have to do that anymore. But I remember that used to be a really big issue for when we started. It just was a big issue. So just be careful of that.
Yeah, one of the things I can do in Encore, I can customize the width of the margins. So I can actually have one a different width on the left as opposed to the right if I wanted to. Not every notation program does this. I know I shoved a lot of information down. I wanted to try to cover as much as I possibly could. So I was really steamrollering through this presentation. I apologize if you feel overwhelmed. I'm hoping everybody got all the handouts, because then you can go back and maybe refer to them and say, oh yeah, that's what that crazy woman was talking about when she was referring to this. So I hope you'll find the handouts helpful. Any other questions, either live, if you want to unmute yourself, if there's something you want to ask verbally, I'd be happy to hear them. We probably all would like to hear the question. Anything from anyone?
Carol?
Darhon.
Yes,
Hi.
Carol. Hi.
If you are arranging a piece for more than one instrument, do you put both instruments on the same page, on the same template, or do you create, for example, the flute? Do you have a separate template and you have only flute music on that, or?
All of the above, actually. It depends on how I'm setting up the book. Obviously, each instrumentalist will need to have their own instrumental part. So I do have a separate template that I use for like a flute part, which I could certainly adapt for French horn or anything else, or voice. So most instrumental players would like to play from their own part because they're used to doing that with orchestras and things. However, if you are creating a score, let's say it's for violin and viola with harp accompaniment, then I would create a score that had the grand staff for the harp part, and then above it, there would be two separate treble staves. So it'd be like a very large grand staff with treble and bass for the harp, and then two more treble staves beamed together in the same four staff system if I were creating a score. and I would create a template for that. I have not yet, doesn't mean it won't happen, written for two separate instruments at the same time. But yeah, that's so I would create a separate template for that, so that I have that to work from as kind of my master template. But I always provide a separate part for the instrumentalist.
Okay, thank you.
First of all, because if you're playing the flute, it's really hard to reach down and do a page turn, right? Or the violin.
Mhm.
So to eliminate page turns for the instrumentalist, it's a good idea to provide a separate instrumental leaflet for them.
Okay,
Any other
thank you.
questions? Good question, Carol.
And Carol, also, when you do that, you create a full score, and then it's called extract part. So you extract the flute part, and then it becomes, you don't have to rewrite the whole flute part. You simply extract it, and the program does
Right.
it for you.
Yeah. But then you have to adjust the spacing and the layout and everything. But yeah, so what I can do in my program, once I have my score set, I simply do a command to delete the staff that's not needed. That leaves only like the flute part there. I resave it as a flute score only, and then I adjust all the spacing. I do all the stuff I did on the proofreader's checklist with that flute score only. Any other questions in either the chat or verbally? No? I want to thank everybody for coming. This ran a little longer than I was hoping. I was trying to finish it up right as an hour, and I was really whipping through things and doing my best to try to get through everything.
Well,
Yeah, I did provide, someone asked about copyright. There is one of the handouts, I gave a brief overview of copyright. It sort of runs down the major things. Angie Bemis did a wonderful webinar not too long ago, Mary, on the whole topic of copyright. Yeah, and that's a whole topic in itself. But I did give you a brief handout, like a one-page handout that was linked about that particular issue. Do we want to put that handout in the chat also?
what I'm going to do is I'll do a follow-up on this, and it'll be in the blog part of our website.
Okay.
And the handouts will be there. And then Margaret, you will also see on our blog page Angie Bemis's presentation also. The handout is there, and her video, an unlisted YouTube video of her presentation is there also.
All right. Thank you so much. I'm
Thank
done.
you. Thank you. And we want to mention that Darhon has a website. It's dragonflower.com, right?
Mhm.
And that is named after, it's Welsh. So it's got the Welsh picture of the dragon flower. And then on Darhon's music is sold worldwide. Sylvia Wood sells it. I'm sure Atlanta Harp Center. It's on Sheet Music Plus. We sell it, and it's on her website as well. I think you have, what, 30 publications?
I don't know. I know I have over 300 arrangements, individual arrangements. Almost all of them now they're in collections,
Mhm.
because it's just more efficient and cost effective for the customer to have them in smaller collections rather than individual sheets. But it's, yeah, when I got to like 300, I stopped counting the number of arrangements. Yeah, but they're grouped in collections, and I think it's around 30 collections now. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate everybody's attending. Be well, stay safe with COVID and all that. Great to see everybody. Nice to see some faces that I hadn't associated with certain names. I mean, some of you I know by face, but I'm clicking and sort of looking at a lot of the people's faces that I didn't know. So great to see everybody. All right. And if you have any questions, and you were maybe too timid to ask them, please email me. All right. I'm pretty easy to find. My business email is simply dragonflowermusic@gmail.com. That's very easy to remember. If you can't remember that one, my personal email is harpwoman, like a woman who plays the harp, harpwoman@gmail. So I check both of those regularly. So feel free to email me with additional questions. And somebody, if you have specific copyright questions that aren't answered by that handout, I'd be happy to address those also in a private email. So please do email me. Thanks.
Thank you, Darhon.
You're welcome. Let's end this meeting.
Okay, bye, everybody.
Take care. Bye.